Coming up on this episode of DevelopSec Live, we discuss multi-factor authentication, take a look at Wordpress AutoUpdate, Browse-Aloud's code hiccup, Google's not secure indicator, and Apple's iBoot code release. Tackling the challenge to integrate security into the development process? Looking for insights, answers, and practical solutions to avoid getting overwhelmed? Welcome to the DevelopSec Live, where our focus is your success in securing and improving development processes. And here is your host, James Jardine. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the DevelopSec Live. And today we want to talk a little bit about two-factor authentication. Last week in the news segment, we talked about Google's two-factor authentication and the low percentage of people that apparently have it enabled. In that newscast, we talked about, I think the number was less than 10% or around 10% of Gmail users or Google users actually have enabled two-factor authentication. And it really got me thinking about two-factor authentication, why we might not be using that, and maybe how we can make that better. So today, I want to dive into that a little bit more. But before we start talking about two-factor authentication, I think it's important that we go back and we think about how authentication typically has been for most users. And in most people's cases, we know of username and password. So we log into a website, we go in, we put in our username, sometimes it's just a random username, sometimes it's our email address, and then we put in a password, right? That super secret, only you know piece of information to help access your account. And that was it. That was how we protected our accounts from other people accessing our data. And this somewhat works. If you've got a good password, if there's other protections in place, this can actually be a pretty useful way to protect your account. Of course, as we've seen over the years, we've modified the complexity of password requirements. Used to be, hey, as long as it's 6 characters. I remember applications that would allow, and I still have seen applications that allow 1-character passwords, which is really horrible. But it was 6 characters, and then we started moving up to 8 characters. Now we're up to 12 or 15 for the minimum of characters. We have gone through complexity requirements that require that you have 1 letter, 1 number, 1 special character, 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, you name it. It wants all these different things to help make a better password so somebody can't get access to that password. And we've got other controls that we have in place that help protect that authentication mechanism, right? We have brute force protection, so somebody can't just come in and try a whole bunch of passwords against your account. Most systems require or enforce an account lockout period. That account lockout period is meant to stop that brute force attack so that when somebody tries more than 5 attempts or 3 attempts, it locks the account. You can try no more. Now I can't get your password. I can't get into your account. So we have a whole bunch of different protections that we've tried to put in place to help protect the username and password. Well, unfortunately, even with those protections in place, we still see where we fall short with username and password. And that is really around the idea of either picking a bad password that's really easy to guess. I don't need a lot of guesses to try. We try password 1 with a capital P, so we meet all the requirements. We have different things that we can do to pick bad passwords. We pick summer 2018. So we have, capital letters, we have regular letters, we have numbers in there. It's complex. It's long enough to meet the requirement, but it's super easy because we tell people pick something that's easy to remember. Well, it's summer and it's 2018. That's pretty easy to remember. Let me go ahead and pick that. And everybody else is picking that. Makes it really difficult. And then, of course, we've added in password managers so we can, of course, remember all these passwords that we're taking across all these different sites, which brings me to my next point of password reuse. It's so hard when we have to have all these different complex passwords. How am I going to remember all of them? Let me just use one and I'll use it across sites. And then unfortunately what we see all these breaches happening, and these breaches include credentials. And if I get the credentials for one site and you use the same email address and the same password on a different site, well, then I don't have to worry about all these different controls that we put in place to protect against brute force attacks, all these different things, because I have your username and password. Let me just try it. I need one attempt, two attempts maybe, to see if I can access your account. And so how do we beat this reuse issue? Well, one of the ways is password managers. We tell people, don't reuse your password across sites. I've given talks to groups where like, well, can I reuse the same password across, all my social media sites? And I'll use a different one for my banking sites. Again, bad idea. We don't know what sites are going to get compromised when. And to be fair, all those sites contain something that somebody may want to gain access to. So you don't want to reuse those passwords. So we'd say, use different passwords. Get a password manager. You can store all these separately. Okay, well, we got the password manager. We got this stuff. But the next step to help protect us is the two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. Takes us past where we're thinking about here with just dealing with username and password, and it's going to add another step. And that other step should be something that the potential attacker would not know about you. So, okay, I've got your username and password from a breach, or I guessed it because it was really easy. But wait, I don't have this other piece of information. Similar, think about you have your debit card and you've got the physical card, but then you've got your PIN number. So even if you get my card, you don't have the PIN number to be able to use it to go to the ATM to draw money out. Sort of what we're doing with this multi-factor. I mean, that is a form of multi-factor authentication. It's going to help add that protection to protect our accounts, which is something we need to consider. Doesn't matter what site it is, if they offer it, we need to make sure that we're trying to sign up for and get it going. Unfortunately, and I just came across this, I'll talk about this in just a minute, I came across the same scenario where it was such a pain. It's too difficult to deal with. And so ultimately in the end, yeah, I'm not going to go ahead and enable this. To me, it wasn't worth it, right? This is weighing out the risk of what we're doing on the internet and what we're doing with our computer systems. So we have to think about that. So let's consider some of the concerns that we have of maybe why we're not implementing this well, why people are not using it, and what type of steps can we maybe take to move forward if we're thinking about implementing it for our users, or if we're a user, why I should be taking into account the security of things and why I should use two-factor authentication. So there's a few reasons that I think about when I think about two-factor authentication and why people may not actually be using the two-factor authentication. And I think one of the big things there is a lot of people are confused about what is two-factor authentication, or we call it multi-factor authentication. So we've got two different things that we're calling this, and it makes it a little bit more difficult because the more terms you throw out there, the more people get confused. They're like, I'm just going to throw my hands up. I don't know what to do here. Right? And in reality, two-factor authentication is a form of multi-factor authentication. All multi-factor authentication is saying we have more than one factor. So typically we have that username and password, and then add on another factor of a token, some other piece. Maybe it sends a message out to you to click and say, yes, I want to do this on your device. Maybe you have a hard-coded device, a hardware piece that creates that second factor, or another piece. Maybe you have to do fingerprint scanning. Multi-factors, we have more than one. So when we think about two-factor authentication, really what we're talking about is I have two. I don't have more than two, I just have two. So it's a subset of multi-factor. Really, we use them interchangeably, and they are interchangeable. But because we use different versions of it all over the place, I can see how people may get confused about what it is, and they're not really sure, what are we using it for? I mean, I know it's helping protect my account, but so many users don't understand, and even application developers and organizations don't understand the attack vectors of why we need that second factor. And, I talked about this when I first started talking, and it's a lot about we have password reuse. We have poorly implemented forgotten password screens or functionality that's available, that it's possible for somebody to get that password or do a password reset to be able to set a new password. But if I've got that second factor on there, that's that extra layer of protection that if these other layers fail, I've got another layer to protect me. And that's what we think about when we talk about security is security in layers, defense in depth. Yes, I've got the username and password. I've got it there. I've got password resets. I've got all these pieces. But what if these break down? What if somebody's able to reset my password without my knowledge? They can abuse that feature set. What if they can do that? All right, well, if that fails, I want to be able to push and do this other piece, which is that second factor. So we got to clean up how we present it and make it clear. This is why we're doing this. This is an added layer. And at the current time where we see a lot of these breaches and a lot of different things going on with accounts, that we want that second factor. You want to have something that's going to help protect you when this piece happens so that you're not caught with your account being compromised. Because that can be a really tricky situation, and we don't want to get caught in that. So we want to make sure we're protecting us that. Now, the next thing that I find as pretty common as to why it is people may not be implementing their two-factor authentication. And I will tell you, this is somewhat things I see when I go to implement it on a site or use it on a site that I'm accessing is, it's so complex. It's so difficult to figure out where do I go to implement this. I just want to click a button and enable it. But if you watched my Google demo from the last newscast, it's up on the DevelopSec site. I walk through setting up the SMS version, and it's a bunch of screens. You have to know what menu item to go under to figure out, okay, where do I need to go to enable this? And I got to click here, and I got to click there, and I got to do this, and I got to get my phone out, and I got to add this on. There's so many steps that so often we make it so complex that now I don't want to take the time, or it's so buried that I can't find it. It's not in my face saying, hey, you should enable two-factor. So I'm not going to do it, right? If I have to go hunt for it. Now, I typically will hunt for it. If I think that there's two-factor available, I'll try to figure out how to do it so I can go in and enable it because I want to protect my accounts. I don't reuse passwords across accounts, but even still, like I said, there's other risks associated with that. So I try to go through and make sure that if I can enable it, I want to enable it. And then when we think about when we do enable it, okay, if I can find my way to it, there's lots of options. And this goes back to the confusion. Do I do SMS? Do I not do SMS? Do I want to get that text message? Do I want to use an app? How do I want to take the approach of dealing with this? Because you talk to some people in security and they say, oh, don't use SMS. That's bad. Somebody could take over your phone, right? And then they can get your messages. So you shouldn't use SMS. You should use an app or you should do this other piece. And now it gets more confusing. Yet so many places use SMS. Most of the banks I use SMS to be able to send that second factor, even though half the community will say don't, half the community will say will do, but we use SMS. Others will allow you to have multiple techniques to be able to do it. I can use SMS. I can use backup codes. I can use an app. There's all kinds of different ways. And, quite honestly, it's good to have a second way to do it because if you ever lost your phone and can no longer get access to your Authenticator app or you're missing something else and now you're trying to get back in, now it's even in some situations more difficult just to get access back. How do I get back into my account? And I've had that dealing where my phone died 2 Christmases ago. My phone just bricked on me, just died, no longer any good. And I had accounts that were very difficult to get back in. Good from a standpoint of people aren't just easily getting into my accounts. Bad, I needed to get into my account. How do I get in? And so that makes it very difficult. And so the more we make it complex, the less chance people are going to want to actually use that feature to be able to pull it out and move forward with it. And that could be a very difficult thing. Now, the next thing that I find very interesting is really talking about the number of options that we have going on here. So let's take a look here. I did a quick search, and if you actually look on the iOS app and do a search for Authenticator, there are over 200 Authenticator apps out there that you can download. And this is a kind of a big problem, right? I mean, that's too much. That's way too many apps to think about. At this point, if I have to use all of them, and you don't have to use all of them, but I'm going to have more apps than I have Authenticator apps than I have passwords that I'm trying to keep track of. My phone screen is going to be full of password apps to try to help protect me, and it just gets out of hand. And so I'll talk about that for a second. Quick little story. As I was going through, I'd actually written a blog post to talk about this after the newscast, and then I was looking up one of my accounts to a recent account I received. And I clicked on my settings and I saw it said multi-factor authentication. Great. I'm going to go ahead and click on it. I'll set it up. Well, come to find out, there's one option for their multi-factor authentication, and that's to use a specific application, an Authenticator app that you can get for their piece. And I thought, okay, well, it's got a barcode. Maybe I can, use Authy, or I could use Google Authenticator, so that way I can try to bring everything down into one. Well, I went through the process. I got the barcode. I scanned it. It went into my app. But then all of a sudden, the page timed out. And it said, hey, we didn't receive a response. There was no place to input numbers. Usually when you do two-factor authentication and a barcode, you enter the 6 digits that provide to show that, yes, I have access. Well, I'm assuming this app, behind the scenes, when you scan the barcode, it talks back to the server and says, hey, I just got this value. We're good to go. So the app that I'm trying to consolidate with didn't work with it. So now I'm stuck saying, okay, do I want to download yet another app? And currently I would say I probably have 4 different Authenticator apps already on my devices to be able to do this. Do I want another one? And to be quite honest, no, I don't. I did not want another one. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to enable multi-factor. I don't really use this account. While it does have sensitive information in it, to be fair, I use pretty good passwords. It's not a reused password across any place else. I'm not going to get into testing their site to see how good or bad it really is, but I'm not going to add another device on there to try to add more Authenticator apps and get this stuff going. Because to me, to be fair, it's just way too much. I don't want that much information on my systems that I have to fight to do this. And so I fear a little bit that as we're going through this, we're shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. As we're trying to increase security, we're making it too much. It's too difficult that I don't want to do it. And we always have that battle of usability when we talk about security. And this is the point where we start getting unusable, in my opinion, that I have to go get a different app for different things. So if you're an organization that's building an application and you're going to implement two-factor authentication, and I recommend implementing two-factor authentication within your apps, provide that as an option for people. One, make it easy to find, make it easy to do. If you want somebody to do it, we actually have to make it pretty simple for them to go through the process to enable this. 2, consider what type of app you're going to use. What method are you going to allow for people to implement this second factor authentication? Are you going to do it over SMS? Or are you going to do it with an Authenticator app? If you're going to do an Authenticator app, is it a form in which multiple apps would work? Could I use Google Authenticator? Could I use Authy? Or is this specific to our app and it requires a specific app? And are people going to be willing to download a brand new app just for that one application? Because again, that's going to be a hurdle to get in there. But we want to make sure that we have this information available. I recommend, if you've got a way to be able to pull statistics, how many people in our system are using the two-factor authentication? How many people have it enabled? And find out, is this broadly used? Are very few people using this? In the Google situation, you see 10% using. Okay, well, let's go back and try to figure out, why are more people not doing this? Is it too hard to find? Is it too difficult to bring in? Do people not feel like this account is not worth adding two-factor authentication into? A lot of times people think email, well, it's just my email friends, it's not really sensitive information. It's not that big of a deal. But, email is pretty big. It's important for us because when you do password resets, when you do forgot passwords, when you do registrations, all this stuff comes to email. So you might not think that there's a lot of sensitive information in there, but because password resets go to email, because all these things happen through email, we verify through email. If I can get access to your email account, this can be a big concern in that I can maybe reset passwords and gain access to your other accounts. So this is something we really want to make sure that we think about, and don't just sit down and say, hey, we're going to implement two-factor authentication, let's send it out. Actually sit down and define, how do you want to implement it? What tools do you want to use? How is it going to be presented? There's a lot that actually goes into what would seemingly be a simple task. So hopefully this is helpful information. If you've got more information or thoughts about two-factor authentication, feel free to share them. Reach out to us on Twitter at DevelopSec, or you can reach me, James at DevelopSec.com. And, share your thoughts, share the information, because there's lots we can learn from everybody. And, we just need to keep sharing that information to help everybody get a little bit better and more secure. So stay tuned to follow up with the news segment coming up next. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the DevelopSec newscast, where we try to pick news stories that we could take something away from. Not just to talk about news stories, but where we can actually take this information back, bring it to our organization, bring it to our personal life, and it's actually going to help us make better decisions on what we're currently doing. So the first news story we're going to talk about is WordPress. Everybody is aware of what WordPress is, right? I mean, it's a pretty popular platform. We use it all over the place. And one of the great things, a few years ago, back in 3.7, they started implementing auto updates. Now, we all know how important updates are with our applications to make sure that when security vulnerabilities are found and they're patched, or other issues are resolved within the platform, that we get those updates in a timely manner. This is one of the biggest causes of where we see holes in our systems and potential breaches, right? It's because we're not recording that and bringing it up to speed. So 3.7, they introduced the ability to auto-update. Well, unfortunately, we just learned last week they did a release for 4.9.3. Now, 4.9.3 unfortunately broke that auto-update capability. Now, they caught this pretty quick, but unfortunately, a bunch of people had already received 4.9.3, and so the fix to that was to make sure that you actually go in and manually update to 4.9.4. Now, that's pretty simple to do. You just log in to your WordPress admin account, and in there is a button that says, hey, there's a new version. Click it, it'll update. So that's one way to do it. Unfortunately, it requires that manual effort to go in and do this. And a lot of times with WordPress, people stick them out there. They have a site sitting there, and then they don't remember to go out and update it. They're not paying attention. It just works. So you have to go in there and make sure, hey, am I on at least 4.9.4, so that way I'm not sitting on 4.9.3 for a long time. Now remember that depending on your hosting provider, they may also provide auto update capability. I know with my hosting provider, even before WordPress came out with auto update, they also had auto update capability where their installer robots would actually look and say, hey, is there a new version of WordPress? Yes, there is. Let me go ahead and install this for you. And so if you have something like that already configured, then if you're still on 4.9.3, check, because the installer robot may have actually gone in and saw that there was a new version and updated it for you. But I definitely recommend going out and checking this to validate that, yes, you do have the latest version. Because if you don't, you may be stuck on 4.9.3 and miss out on critical releases that may be presented that you're just not aware because you're just expecting auto update to work. Auto update's a great thing, and I'm glad we have it. We're just going to make sure that we stay on top and follow these notifications. So when they release out that, hey, something broke, you have to go do something, that we're able to go through and do that to take advantage of it. Now, the next story we have comes to us from a company called Text Help. They create a kind of plugin for your browser for websites that is called Browse Aloud. And so basically what it do is it's kind of an accessibility plugin that allows you bring it into your site, and as somebody's on the site, it adds accessibility features, maybe reading the page, translating the page to help them see the content that you have. Now, this is a third-party piece that is brought into other web applications, and we have a lot of these type of pieces out there, right? I mean, so many applications rely on third-party code to provide just this type of functionality, which is good. We want to have this. The downside is what happens when this code base that's not yours, you're just bringing it in, all of a sudden gets maliciously modified, and now you're bringing in modified code that you thought you trusted, but now you don't trust. And that's kind of what happened here, is somehow their code got modified to include basically a crypto miner JavaScript function. So when somebody visited a page and it pulled in this Browse Aloud plugin, it would also load this JavaScript that would then use your processor to help do some crypto mining for the bad guys. Didn't really do nothing malicious to your system besides use the processes. Could have been much worse, that's for sure. But it is using your system, and it's code that we didn't expect that would be there, right? So we want to be able to help protect ourselves against this type of thing. And one way as developers of applications that we do this is through a thing called SubResource integrity. And so reaching out and grabbing this third-party component and bringing it in, this third-party JavaScript library, right? It is a SubResource, and we want to check to make sure that it hasn't been modified. So when you go to build your system and you want to go pull this file in, there should be a hash of that file. You can create this hash. Go out and check the DevelopSec.com blog. We have a whole post talking about SubResource integrity, how to use it, how to create the hashes. But basically what you're doing is you're creating a hash of that file. And so when the web browser goes to pull that hash in, or the file in, it'll then check that hash. You tell it what type of hash you use. It validates the hash, and if the hash is correct, then it'll load that page. If the hash is not correct, then it won't load that page. And so that helps protect us against files that may have been maliciously modified without somebody knowing, right? And so in this case, that would have helped if you had SubResource integrity set up. The browser said, nope, this file's different, I'm not going to load it. Now, of course, this does come with a few problems in the fact that if you use SubResource integrity and those files may happen to change a lot, that could be a problem. Your files may not work very often. But oftentimes, these type of third-party codes don't change really all that often. You know, we see this a lot with pulling in something like a jQuery, right? You're pulling in a specific version, and it doesn't change very often. You know, you'd go in and modify the version you're using to help protect yourself. So that's something that we can use as we're developing applications, is look at SubResource integrity to help protect us when we're pulling in these third-party code bits that could be affecting what we're doing. Now, next we have Google. Now, we talked about Google last week. Of course, we were talking about two-factor authentication. But this time, we're going to talk about changes they're making to Chrome coming up in July of 2018. We've seen this, I've been following this for a few years now as we've made this push for HTTPS over HTTP. And we've seen Firefox does it, Google does it, right? Every year or so, we see them tightening the reins a little bit to say, hey, we're going to start marking this as not secure. And right now, what you see is if you're on an HTTP page, not HTTPS, but HTTP, and there's currently a password box, a credit card box, like account number box, those type of sensitive fields, if those are on there and they're detected and it's over HTTP, then they'll flag it as not secure because that's sensitive information going across. Well, what we're going to see coming out in July is that if the page is HTTP at all, so if there's anything that's not going over HTTPS, or at least the main URL, then it's going to flag it as not secure. And, this has really been a push to try to say we have to go all HTTPS. If you're doing HTTP, traffic could be manipulated, it could be intercepted. Even if it's considered not sensitive data, there's still a security risk, there's still a privacy risk. We don't want that, so we have to mark everything as HTTPS, and the browsers are really pushing this hard. So what we typically want to see is we want to see that secure flag sitting there. And so after July, you're probably going to see a lot more sites that have this secure setting on there to let you know that that traffic between you and the server is properly encrypted. What we don't want to see is the not secure symbol that they put up there that lets you know this is no longer secure. There's stuff that's being transmitted in the clear. How can you protect yourself against that? So just be aware that come July, we're going to start seeing that change. So if your site is using HTTP and not HTTPS, just be prepared for this. Okay, know why you're not using HTTPS or you're using HTTP. But be prepared to answer questions to anybody of your, any of your users that may reach out and say, hey, I'm using your site and the browser says this is not secure. What's your response to that? You want to be prepared to be able to answer that so you can then help make them feel comfortable using your site. Again, you might think that this isn't sensitive information, but this is the way the browsers are pushing things. And as a site owner, we need to be prepared to be able to answer these questions to make sure that we're not caught off guard and maybe say the wrong things. Now, the final story we have for this newscast, talk about Apple. This is kind of big in the news. I think it's a bit hyped up myself. But basically what happened is some of their source code for their iBoot process, which is part of their boot process for their iOS devices, has been leaked out. Apparently this happened 2 years ago. It's been kind of under wraps for a while, but just recently, just the other day, it was then uploaded to GitHub by somebody. Now, generally, I like to think of source code typically as not that sensitive. We treat it very sensitive. For most organizations, we treat it sensitive, right? That's our proprietary code. We don't want somebody getting that information. But unless you're putting things like passwords, keys, secret information, maybe you've got sensitive algorithms in there, a majority of code that we write isn't all that sensitive. To be fair, a lot of the code we write comes off of Google and Reddit and all these other places because it's a lot easier to go out and grab code than it is to recreate the wheel. So we get a lot of code imported. So a majority of our applications is not sensitive information, but in a lot of applications, there are proprietary things, right? How do we do certain algorithms? What do we have in there? And so there is risk of that type of stuff getting leaked out. What effect that'll have, we're still not sure yet. But this code specifically is interesting because rumor is, according to the articles, that a low-level employee actually leaked this code 2 years ago to some friends that are in the jailbreaking business. I'm sure you've heard of jailbreaking. It's the ability to modify your iOS device so you're not limited to some of the controls that are put in place. Maybe you want to install apps that aren't from the App Store or do some other things. We also look at jailbreaking as a way to be able to install malicious stuff, right? If your phone is jailbroken, you are at much greater risk of having some malicious code being put on there as you're doing stuff on your device. So jailbreak is important, but keep in mind, we've seen jailbreaks happen for the past few years, not because the source code is released. The people that do this have the ability to go in and actually reverse engineer the binaries, right? The code that is released, they can go in and reverse engineer this stuff and find this stuff. Will having the code make it easier? Sure. I mean, if there's a lot of vulnerabilities there, it may make it a lot easier. Certainly easier to look at source code than it is to look at assembly or reversed code. But they could still do a lot of this stuff. And also keep in mind that the code released was for iOS 9. We're currently on iOS 11. So this is a few years back that this code was for. Did some of this code get brought over to iOS 11? I'm sure it did. A lot of code gets transmitted over to the newest versions, right, from previous versions. But we have to hope that there's already security checks going on. We're doing things internally at Apple that hopefully are doing security checks that there's not a lot. Of course, we're still going to see bugs get out. Look at anybody that does a whole bunch of security. We still have security flaws make it out. No doubt on that. But we'll have to wait and see what real effect this had on this. The other aspect that people are talking about is, should this low-level employee have had access to the code? This is a tough challenge for applications that or organizations that create applications, because how do you properly lock down the code, especially when you have people that are given access, right? We have to trust certain people that have access to our code base. What happens when they break that trust? How do we protect against that? And it brings up the point of, we put our controls in place, but are we doing things like reconnaissance? Are we checking things like Reddit and GitHub and these different venues to say, hey, is any of our code base out here? Do we have any process to check this? Because, when you hire somebody to do a pen test, or you bring somebody in, or even just an attacker that's going to look at you, right? They're going to go look and see if this information's out there. Did you make the source code available? And this is certainly not the first time somebody's been caught with source code out on the internet that has helped break into something. Now, fortunately here, we haven't seen any ill effects as of yet. And again, we'll have to wait and see what type of ill effects come from this, if they do. Right now, just chill about it and wait and see. Again, it's older versions. They do a great job of keeping people on up-to-date versions of iOS. So hopefully we won't see a whole lot of badness come out of this. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I'm saying optimistic. But at least internally, we can start looking at how can we try to protect ourselves that this stuff doesn't come up anytime soon within our own organizations. So thanks for joining us for this newscast, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Okay, so we talked a little bit about SubResource integrity, and I put together a little bit of a demo that walks through how does SubResource integrity work, how do you set it up on your application so you can help protect yourself. So to help walk through that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to play the demo that will show us how we can do this. This quick demo will walk you through how to use SubResource integrity. SubResource integrity is used when we're going to make a request and pull in resources from an external party into our site. This is common when we're doing things like jQuery and these other third-party kind of add-ins that we bring in. And so I have a simple page here, demo.html, and you can see in here that I have a script resource going out and pulling in a JavaScript file. Now this JavaScript file doesn't do a whole lot. We can actually go take a look at it over here. And we can see that all it does is alerts demo script loaded. So I just want to show that we actually pulled in the demo script that we have and that it is working. So if we go up here where I already have it loaded and we refresh the page, we can see that we get the alert box that says demo script loaded. This is great. We're pulling in the resource as we expect, but what happens when that resource gets modified and we weren't aware of it? Say somebody puts some malicious code in there and all of a sudden we're pulling that into our application and it's going to execute that code. We'd have no way of doing that. So if we were to modify the script over here, we would run into problems because it would just run in the context of our application. And that can be dangerous for our users and our organization. So we want to be able to try to stop that. And that's what SubResource integrity is trying to do. Is basically what it does is it forces a hash on the file that you're expecting. So if that file has changed since you got your hash, then it won't load the file. So let's see a couple ways of how we can actually create the hash that's going in there. Now I'm using, this is local on here, I'm actually using the Linux subsystem on my Windows machine, and so I'm using bash here to be able to run OpenSSL commands. And I'm already in the directory. I've gone out and copied that JavaScript file that we see that we're referencing right here, demoscript.js. I've copied that local. Now that I have it local, I can go ahead and run some commands to actually create the hash of that file. So here we're going to use OpenSSL, and we're going to do a SHA-384 digest of it, right? The hash. We're going to do it as binary, and then we specify the files that we have. So demo script1.js. And then we're going to take that hash and we're going to pipe it into OpenSSL again. This time we're going to base 64 that value, so that way we can actually use it since it came down binary hash. And then when we hit enter, we'll see that we get this hash value up here. Okay, so this is the hash value that we're going to use in our script tag. So let me show you what that would actually look like. I'm going to go ahead and already got this played out, but you can see we add an integrity attribute. I put what type of hash I did, the SHA-384, and then we paste in that hash value, and then we add in a cross origin equals anonymous. Because when we're dealing with sub-resource integrity, we're going to look at cores. So we want to make sure that we set this to anonymous. So let's just grab this, and we'll paste it back in our demo, and we'll just replace the current script tag that we have with the new one. Now, if we run this, we shouldn't notice any difference unless that file's changed, but it hasn't. So if we come over here and we'll run it again, we can see demo script loaded. Everything is fine. It works as expected. But what happens when we come over here, and let me get out of that file, and we'll update it. All right, so this time, let's go ahead and say, instead of alert demo, let's do demo 1. This is just a simple change, but it will help identify that when we make this modification, the resource will no longer load. So we'll go ahead and change this. We'll save that file. So now we're demo 1 instead of demo. So now let's reload this page and see what happens. Notice how I didn't get the alert this time. Instead, I got this message over here that says failed to find a valid digest. So the file has changed and it has failed our integrity check. And this is what's going to help protect us in the event that that third-party resource that we're linking out to may be vulnerable. And it's just as simple as putting this on here with that hash. Now, there's another way to be able to generate these hashes. So a cool thing we can do is we can actually generate this on the web. We can go to srihash.org. And with this, we can actually take our URL. So we have our URL already embedded because we're using it. We copy that URL. We paste it into the generator, and we just hit hash. And this actually generates that script for us. Now, notice that the hash SHA-384-IXD, whereas we had ZMS over here. The reason for that is because this grabbed the hash of the latest file, which is the one that said demo 1 instead of demo. But basically all you have to do is grab this, copy it out. We can go paste it in. We'll replace our current script tag. We'll save our file. We'll go back to the demo page. And this time when we reload, we see demo 1 script loaded, right? Because we've generated the hash off the updated file to be able to load that in. So that's a quick walkthrough of how you can use SRI to help protect the integrity of the files you're expecting when they come in. And if they're not found valid, it just won't load that code into your application and it won't run it. All right, hopefully that quick little demo there shows you how important SRI can be and how simple it can be to implement it. We just have to be aware that it's an option. If you know anybody that's looking for application security assistance or trying to build their program, they have questions about application security topics and how best they can implement them internally, send them our way. Send them to DevelopSec.com, or you can also reach us at jardinesoftware.com, where we specialize in helping organizations with their application security needs. So thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll catch you on the next episode.